this because it encourages all of us to do that within the organization. Even here at business school, we're very entrepreneurial in terms of just growing all the offerings and developing. So I'm not the speaker. The speaker is there waiting to speak. So mine is just to congratulate our authors, Mjumo. Thank you very much. Look at this. He's a professor, associate professor of technology and operations, Professor Diran. There he is. I also acknowledge he's a professor of innovation and policy management. I also acknowledge the other two co-authors, Mr. Hugh Molotsi, founder and CEO of Mjumo, and himself, a leading innovator. Where's Hugh?
There he is.
Thank you very much. We've got Hugh, and who join us this evening on Zoom. And Jeff. Jeff
He's not here.
But Jeff is not here. Let's give him a round. I'd also like to welcome Rita. Those who make the explanations, and we are happy to. Mjumo, CEO, South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, who will be joining me in the conversation. Ramels, I call him Ramels, but it's Professor Ramels. I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maurice Kadebe, Director, Best Business School. A project of this nature would not have been possible without the collaboration with the authors and the publisher. So we felt it was appropriate for us, before we start, to also invite a representative from the publishing house, in this case, Wits University Press, represented by Roshan Kada, who is the commissioning editor.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm so delighted for the authors of this book to have such a wonderful turnout. You and Mjumo and I met before COVID, actually, at Mike's Kitchen, and that's where we got this project seeded. And Wits University Press has not historically published much in this area, so we were also innovating and taking a risk and trying to be entrepreneurial with this project, and we're hoping that it takes flight. But from the attendance in the room, I think it's a very positive information already. You will hear more about the book from you. I'll give you some context, but it initially started as a book that was written for the American audience, because you was based there with Jeff at the time. And when we looked at the project, we really wanted it to have an African focus and to have African case studies. And that's where Mjumo and Diran came on board, and they've really contributed and made this book a proudly African book with many interesting, innovative case studies that we hope will be useful to readers and to intrapreneurs, the term that I discovered through reading this book. And something that I found exciting and unique about it was that many people are not going to be able to start their own businesses for various reasons, but companies do have talented people. And how can companies, institutions like universities, NGOs, how can you ignite that passion from within the people that you've got there? And this is really the central thesis of this book, and what was really exciting for us. And Wits University Press is delighted to publish it. It took a while to get in the making. We had COVID that caused some hiccups and teaching loads, but in spite of all of that, the authors rallied round and they've produced something that we are very proud to be associated with. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. All right, folks, now we move into the core business of this evening. You know, we're here to celebrate and to dissect this very important book. And what is so distinctive about it is that it's the collaboration between practitioners and scholars. And that's what gives it that edge in terms of impact. And I would like to start by inviting, first of all, good evening, Hugh.
Yeah, good evening. How are you doing today?
Are you in California?
That's correct.
Right. Okay, so I would like to start by inviting you to, to just give us the contextual background to the book, how the book started, what inspired you to write the book, what are the key areas does the book cover, and what you seek to achieve through this book. Could you please just, for the next few minutes, give us that contextual background?
Yes, thank you, Professor. Some of you may know, I spent most of my career at a company called Intuit. It is a company that produces a leading tax preparation software and small business bookkeeping software in the United States. And I started out as a software developer working on QuickBooks for DOS. Many of you are probably too young to even know what DOS is, but that's how I started my career. And the company at the time was fairly small and very agile in its makeup. And it turned out to be a great environment for someone like me to develop and grow. And I got a lot of opportunities to work on new to the world products and services. But specifically, there was an opportunity that came up because at one point we realized many of our small business customers experienced cash flow problems because their customers were often very slow in paying them. And so the question would come up to say, why don't you accept credit card payments? And they said, it was just too difficult and too expensive to get the capability to process credit card payments. And so, we got this idea to say, well, why don't we Intuit provide a service to make it easy for small businesses to essentially get this capability. After a lot of advocating and trying to influence folks, I, at the time, a young frontline engineer, was paired with a product manager, and they said, okay, go ahead and build this service, which we did, and eventually launched, it became a big business for Intuit. Today generates over $1 billion in revenue. But reflecting on that opportunity, obviously not realizing at the time, but it was quite a rare experience that someone as junior as I was at the time was entrusted with this responsibility to go and create a new business. And as my career progressed at Intuit, I started to realize that as we became bigger and more bureaucratic, that these kind of opportunities were harder to come by for other people in the organization, and that we were moving away from what I would say was our innovative culture. And so we recognizing this, there was a group of us who said, no, we need to make a concerted effort to bring back this spirit of innovation, of being true entrepreneurs back to the culture by establishing a program that would encourage employees to bring up, to contribute the ideas and to actually work on them, because we know this has borne fruit in the past. And so anyway, that's how we ended up starting essentially an innovation program. Jeff, who is not here today, unfortunately, he was involved with a number of us. And that journey, was not a straightforward, smooth journey. There were lots of ups and downs, lots of setbacks, lots of lessons learned. And we got to a point where we would get lots of requests for other companies to come and visit us because they had heard about what Intuit was doing, and they wanted to learn about how we had established this culture of innovation. And through a lot of these engagements, we also got to meet innovation leaders at other companies like Google, Atlassian, and LinkedIn. And we got to learn about some really innovative, interesting things that they had done that we could take, we could leverage as well. And also learned about some of the struggles that they had to overcome. And so all of this inspired Jeff and I to say, well, we should write a book about this, because one of the problems with that we saw with a lot of literature on this subject, they would make things sound very straightforward. They would say, look, here are all the things we've accomplished. And you'd find that when somebody tries to do that in their own company and they run into challenges, they think, oh, it's because of my company or because of me, not realizing these challenges are actually things to expect and that others have run into and had to overcome. And so we felt like we'd be doing a great service to the world if we could actually say, well, here are the lessons that we've learned, here are the challenges we've had to overcome. And in fact, let's actually give you, in some ways, a prescription, a recipe that you can follow, that you can make your own by saying, well, here is how I can launch an innovation program based on things that we know have worked for us. For example, very common challenge is convincing leaders that, having an innovation program is going to be good business. Well, obviously, we had lots of proof points from successes throughout the industry of how this has worked. And so we help prepare the content so that you can make a compelling argument. And so that was what really inspired the writing of the book. And of course, in one of my visits to South Africa, I was invited by Mjumo to come and talk about the book at WITS Business School. And I was pleasantly surprised at how much it resonated and how well it was received, but also realizing that there was a big gap, that our stories were very US-centric, and that there was a lot of opportunity to make it a better book, a book that would resonate with an African audience and also resonate with a business school audience. And so that's how the collaboration with Diran and Mjumo started. And I'm very proud to say I feel this new edition of the book is an even more effective, more compelling book. So that's a little bit of the background.
Thank you very much, Hugh. At this point, I would like to invite you, Professor Mjumo, just to give us your observations. Maybe perhaps focus on some of the case studies, the African case studies, and how you selected those and how you went about, documenting those. And whatever you want to say, please.
First of all, it's been a great privilege to collaborate with Hugh. On behalf of the academic side of the team, Diran and myself, we really enjoyed it. We felt that it was important for this edition to bring in some of the case studies, as you said, and stories of innovation that's going on within the continent. And there are, in fact, many of these stories, but they're not really very well known. Prof. Radebe shared with us something of his own experience. We can include that in the third edition. So there's many of these stories, amazing things within the environment, using innovation as a set of tools. And that's really one of the main messages we want to get at. It's not magic. These are tools that can be learned and that can be applied in many different contexts, not just in America, not just in Silicon Valley. So some of the interesting stories, I'll just share one or two that we have in the book. For example, I'm sure we've all heard about M-Pesa, right? But M-Pesa, if you actually go into the details, is an amazing story of entrepreneurship. from two angles. One from the government side. So the regulators of the banking and financial sector in Kenya were very, very innovative in how they received that offering that came to them. They didn't say, no, we're not interested in this, it's different from what we're doing. They were receptive and they were very entrepreneurial in terms of policy and regulation, but also from the corporate side. It's an amazing story of entrepreneurship from the corporate side in terms of Safaricom. You know, how they nurtured this idea, and now it's blossomed. Now it's a global industry. The mobile money industry, it started in Africa, and it's still the area in terms of implementation of mobile money is still within. So that's one of the stories. Another interesting one is from South Africa that we can use is from the banking sector, FNB. Again, they're very famous for innovation, but all of this happens within the context of them as an existing bank. And maybe a third one I can share is Discovery. Discovery is highly entrepreneurial, but also intrapreneurial company. They built many or several large businesses that started just within their own company and basically created new companies under the Discovery umbrella. So this is just to share one or two stories and just to encourage everyone to say, look, these are things that are very doable, and we've tried to share some of those examples in the book and show that they're being done within Africa. We must not always be looking outside. Yes, we must learn from the outside, but there's a lot that's happening here that can happen.
What criteria did you employ to select these cases?
So, first of all, we wanted them to be representative across the continent. So there's representation across all the regions of Africa. And also we wanted to highlight some of the stories that are perhaps not so well known. But they had to be substantive. They had to be real in terms of the results that were achieved, commercial success, and so on. So those are some of the criteria. We wanted them to be comparable to the examples in terms of the level of success, but also show how they work with the context.
Yes. Diran, I had a chat on Monday with one of the our country's, banking CEOs about a whole range of things, including innovation. And one of the big issues, you teach innovation studies here at Mzyece Business School. You're an innovation expert. How does one cultivate innovation within an organization, especially when there is resistance to it? And maybe you can talk about some of the strategies one can implement to ensure that innovation finds expression in an organization.
All right. Thanks, Prof. Mills, and greetings to everyone again. I think the book could have been retitled Organizational Innovation.
Yeah.
Intrapreneurship is all about innovation within organizations.
Yeah.
And so we have many models that we propose to do that. Setting up innovation competitions, setting up free time for employees to work on things that they're interested in personally, but that may have an impact on the society. How do you align and so forth? Even reaching out to the community outside. Experiment within an organization on solutions that the organization has the capabilities to accomplish, and those have an impact. So the entire book could be named Building Innovation in Organizations. That being said, I teach innovation studies and not entrepreneurship. In the real world, you can't separate the two. But at the university, we separate the two. And as academics that we are, we're notorious specialists. And so, no, this is innovation, and no, that is not entrepreneurship. And so the first course is always about bringing the two together so that students can see the connection between this innovation course and the broader world of entrepreneurship. And when we talked to Hugh about it, it became very obvious to us that in the US context, all intrapreneurship is innovation driven. Why wouldn't it be? And we said, well, in our context, you can have low degrees of innovation and high degrees of innovation. It just kind of depends. And they're two different things. And so this book actually elevates, we say we have to make explicit the role of innovation in entrepreneurship. And there are two ways to look at it. One is exactly what you've said, a culture of innovation, which the book does marvelously. And there's another way, a more subtle way. Again, Hugh challenged us coming from outside of academia. This is what I enjoyed about the book, working with practitioners and my colleague, of course, is that it says, well, I talk to young people and they say they want to start a software company, but they don't know how to build an app. I want to set up an energy company, but I don't know how to procure or build a plant, and none of my friends know how to do it. So how can you start a company on a product or service that you don't have any substantive knowledge about, and you have to go and procure the technological capabilities from the one who does? And so we said, well, we need to deepen our understanding of innovation, look in our environment, acquire the skills that we don't have. So innovation in this context is also about depth of capabilities. So there's some things we can all imagine the world we would like, but you have to build it. And to build it, you have to go to school and you have to study or some kind of training environment. So that was sort of my voice, and we hope that our voices are not detectable. The second angle that I did, and you mentioned the notion of long-lasting. There are two Japanese companies that claim that how is it that companies last this long? And we saw that there's something in their cultural and philosophical heritage that drives the company's vision and mission. It's rooted in the environment from a values perspective. It's also rooted in the environment from the local knowledge perspective, even though high tech may advance it and scale it up, but it's rooted. And we said this is very important to us. So Wangari Maathai, in her Nobel Peace Prize in 2004, talked about how when she was young, she could drink water directly from a river or from a spring. 50 years later, these springs didn't even exist anymore. So that allowed her to study the role of tree planting in regenerating the ecology and the ecosystem. So she built a large national organization around that in East Africa predominantly. And young people had to be inspired by her overall mission because she's not going to pay that much. They had to acquire skills and knowledge, either formally or informally, and they had to be motivated as employees of a non-profit. And what are the outcomes? It's not cash flow. The outcomes are number of rivers restored and so on and so forth. So intrapreneurship is not just about businesses, it's about policy intrapreneurship. Yeah, policy intrapreneurship. We need policymakers who are motivated by an ideal and go beyond the call of their portfolios. And so we have a broad view on innovation-driven entrepreneurship and lots of examples. Every time we go outside Africa, because we have a lot to learn from others, but we always bring it home. We always say, this is how it can be applied in our context, north, south, east, west, and central. So in a nutshell, that's another take on it.
Yeah. Before I invite you, Dr. Itabi Milabu, I'm looking at the title, The Intrapreneur's Journey, Empowering Employees to Drive Growth. And could you please reflect on what you mean by this, empowering employees to drive growth?
Yeah, so if you think about the typical company, we say the biggest underutilized assets are the ideas in their employees' heads. So some of you may be able to empathize with this thought, which is you may have worked at a company where they are embarking on some sort of transformation journey. And they say, okay, let's bring in some smart consultants, it might be McKinsey or Bain or somebody, and they come in, they do their work, and they prepare a report. And, many, sometime later, and many, after a lot of money has been spent, they share the report. And many employees are saying, I could have told them the same thing, but for free. This is a very common refrain. And that is because often leadership is not reaching out to employees, especially frontline employees, to find out what their ideas are. And in fact, if you work at some of these consulting companies, you'll find the very first thing they do is go and start to interview employees. So that is, we say these are the biggest underutilized assets. And it's unfortunate because many companies miss out on growth opportunities because they did not actually engage their employees. And so, of course, in the book, we share stories about people who had an idea. One of the famous examples is Steve Wozniak, who was an engineer at Hewlett-Packard. He had created in his spare time a prototype of a personal computer, and he tried to get HP to commercialize this project, and they turned him down 5 times. And of course, along the way, through a meeting at a club, he met Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs convinced him, let's go create a startup, and that's how Apple started. And so because of this, HP missed out on this opportunity to have been in the early days of the PC revolution. So that's when we say empower employees to drive growth, is to say the company now takes a mindset to say, look, we always want to grow. We always want to extend our products into new areas. We always interested in creating new products. Employees will often have great insights because they spend most of their day working on products or servicing customers. And so they're bombarded with these insights on things that they can do to help customers better or to improve products. So let's engage them. And by engaging them and getting their best ideas, we'll be able to drive growth and have that growth sustain. And that's how you'll see some of the best companies that have had decades of growth. They have this culture where, again, employees are empowered to contribute the ideas, to work on their own ideas. Yes.
Well, thank you. Dr. Tabile, you will be given the task of acting as a discussant this evening. So you've had the benefit of reading the whole book, more than everybody has done here. Could you just give us your reflection on the other aspects of as a respondent?
Thank you very much, Prof. And let me congratulate you for in the School of Business and the authors for this edition, Molotsi and Zias, and Profs Mjumo and Diran, who are my former colleagues or current colleagues. I am an innovation scholar myself, having done my PhD in innovation studies. Seems like it's been ages, perhaps a decade ago, but I remain very interested in the scholarly project, and that's why I collaborate with some friends with colleagues. Yeah. It really is a great honor for me to be here. I really feel privileged to have been asked to be a discussant for what I believe Prof. Mills is one of the best leadership books that I've read. And I'm saying this because I'm an avid reader of leadership. And there are a number of reasons for that, but there's a clip that I came across this week that captured why I like this book so much. It's by Ngozi Adichie. One of these TikTok videos that she made, I think in the past couple of weeks. And it goes, I'm paraphrasing it. It says academics have depth of knowledge, but they tend to write to a very limited audience, such that the ideas are never really never get to the people that they are meant to. And so she says she wishes that academics so accessible in their life. And I thought about that when I in my process of reading the book, in that I could really feel the depth of academic rigor that went into the book, but I also found it extremely accessible. And I think the reason is that it combines both the academics and entrepreneurs in its name. So I really urge those that do not, whether you love reading academic literature or want something that is accessible, this is definitely a book for you. So there are a number of takeaways that I took from this book, but I would really just like to reflect. And the first one I've already alluded to, the fact that the book is extremely accessible for everyone. I can give it to my sister who is in grade 10 and they would understand and they would find themselves in that. So really, really very cleanly written, very simply written. It's not jargon heavy, even areas that have some academic focus are not jargon heavy. So that's the first point. The second point is related to the first one. Whilst it's accessible, there are very clear concepts, academic concepts that have been researched for a very long time. Is it Shumta? Yes, theory,
That's a mark one.
yeah, Mark 1. You understand that that's the part of innovation I didn't do. But it's steeped in knowledge. So if you want a book for you that are doing masters, PhDs that you can refer to, this is the book for you. And the third point is that it's absolutely you can take the lessons, and I see people are noting things that read the book, lessons and apply them in your life. You can take the lessons from this book, it's very practical, and apply them in your academic journey. If you are in the public service, you can take some of the lessons and apply them in your public service. And I really, it's my hope that somehow authors, you invite the public sector and have another forum that focuses on. Our continent needs this message to go through those that do not just develop policies, but those that implement them. There are examples of policy innovations like M-Pesa, and maybe to some extent implementation. But I would hope that the next edition just focuses on examples of implementation of policy. I think there are good examples, but before we even do that, we need to take the message to the public service and to the NGOs. But that's the practicality of the lessons or the learnings from this book. But what really deeply resonates with me is that Afrocentric approach, that you find yourself and your organization in this book as an African scholar, as a Pan-African, which I am. So I think of all the things that resonated with me, the nature of it, is the fact that it is showing how we as Africans can apply the principles to advance the socio-economic development agenda, which is not a view of government alone. If you can't be conscious about advancing socio-economic agenda in your role, in your job, don't expect somebody to take it seriously. It's all our business. So I think that's what this book is. The last point, and I said there are lots of points, it's resource rich. They're probably close to maybe 100 pages of references of material that this book has found or referenced that you can all read and expand your knowledge on those various aspects that have been identified or expounded. So I really liked, I think those are 5 takeaway points. A broad reflection beyond that is the fact that in the world which pitches entrepreneurship versus intrapreneurship, this provides a very bad, right? In our generation, if you're an entrepreneur, you really are not doing well. Because, you know, you gotta make the money, make the bag, and drive those Ferraris. But we can't all start business ventures. Dr. Mjumo and I worked for the Innovation Hub and worked with entrepreneurs. Perhaps you've started, we've tried our hand. But from experience and maybe from our studies, we know that not everybody can be an entrepreneur with an E. However, the principles of entrepreneurship, which is food innovation, are very important in making sure that organizations thrive. I think Hugh really explains it well. So I like the fact that for once, this is a book that's not saying if you're not an entrepreneur with an E, you can be cool within an organization, which is really fantastic. Then I don't want to give the book away, Prof. Mills, but I particularly like the Pamoja case study. There's a case study then on Pamoja. And what I liked about it is very real. It shows that things can fail, that even innovation or intrapreneurship organization is dynamic. You can get on the bandwagon and fall again and fall again. But if you are results in that. But yeah, they are great sets around concepts around time and freedom, design thinking, collaboration, and so on and so forth. Let me end by a quote that started at the beginning of one of the chapters. I'm not going to tell you which chapter. It's knowledge comes by putting things apart, but wisdom comes by putting things together. And it's by John Morrison. And I think it resonates with really the ways from the book. You take things apart only to bring them together. So you gain knowledge.
Thank you. A very illuminating and comprehensive dissection of this book, accessible, rigorous in terms of scholarship, practical, Afrocentric, resource rich, and also threw in a case study, the Pamoja case study there. So that gives us some insight into what we can expect if you buy this book. All right, in the interest of encouraging interaction with our audience this evening, so I will invite you to raise your hand if you want to ask a question or you want to make a comment or to engage with the authors and the whole panel. Over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you very much for this quite fascinating presentation about entrepreneurship led by either or innovation of empowerment. I would like to underline the empowerment part. There is in some countries, at least in France where I come from, you can hear from my accent, a kind of company called cooperative company, whereby, unlike, for instance, both the management and the ownership are fully cooperated. So from there, I have two questions. Number one, does this kind of organization exist in South Africa? And the second thing, in this book, Practical, Resourceful as it is, could it be a kind of a guide or a help to go that route, to share progressively the management and the ownership of an existing company with employees, basically. And
So what's the second question?
sorry,
You said you had two questions.
yes, the first one is whether this type of company, cooperative company, exists in the South African landscape. The second point is whether or not it exists as such. The book help us to go that route, i.e., within a company, share management and ownership with the people working within the company, right? And cooperate fully in terms of management and ownership. Yes.
Thank you. You want to take the question that you want?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, and
All right.
colleagues can jump in if they want. So yes, I do believe we have such corporate forms in South Africa. For example, there's NPOs, non-profits, organizations. But I'm not an expert on corporate form, but I'm pretty sure there are such forms. And then the book is very generic in terms of its ability. And you'll find many examples of NGOs, other kinds of organizations that are non-commercial. So we use the term in the book, non-businesses. There's non-businesses, some are NGOs, some are government agencies, some may be similar to the cooperatives that you're alluding to. But yeah, the principles are generally applicable. And we believe it has to be that way.
Here I'm speaking very much of a commercial company.
Yeah, okay, like a commercial company, but it uses a cooperative.
For the time being, PTY Limited.
Yeah. Okay, maybe others can jump in.
Or even Hugh, if you want to. What is there?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just jump in and say, with regards to at least the second part of the question, the book is really not about driving corporate structure in any particular direction. However, I think there is a resonance with what's being asked here, in that we do talk about the role of leadership changing from one of being very directive to one of being more of what I'll call a servant leadership, where instead of assuming that people at the top have all the good ideas and they just need to direct their workers to implement those ideas, this notion that the workers again are empowered and that actually leaders help to remove roadblocks and enable these teams of employees who are trying to get things done. And so that notion of a servant leadership, I think resonates with these cooperative structures where the workers are actually owners of the company. And keep in mind, when we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, the barriers are not necessarily the corporate structure or who owns what. The barriers are typically bureaucracy and the style of leadership, where you'll see in a lot of large companies, it becomes very directive and very top-down driven.
All right. Shall we take the next question? Thank you. Over to you there, sir.
Thank you very much. And
Start by introducing yourself. Who you are.
I can even stand. Okay. My name is Shingai Ngara. I'm we call it an economic development consultant. First of all, thank you to all of you for great conversation. And I just sort of skimmed the book and with a very good read. I've got a question around South African corporations very specifically. The first panelist brought up FirstRand and Discovery. Now, in their particular case, either the founders are still alive or the founder is still the CEO. And so that obviously influences the entrepreneurial character of those organizations. In my own case, 20 years ago, when I didn't have to shave my head to consider I was in a very large corporation where the group CEO wanted to create an innovation culture. And the theory at the time was, if it's driven by the top, it must have been succeed, and all of us would work in this innovation unit. And we reflected on how we ended up using Star Wars lingo, the Empire Strikes Back, in that the system just did not welcome anything other than business as usual and the fiefdoms and the power structures that were in place. So my question is, in the absence of a very entrepreneurial, founder-driven culture being in place, where you have century-old organizations that have become very bureaucratic in how they function, how do we then very practically look to the implementation of this model? And I'm not sure if the director's experience at Sasol can potentially talk.
Dr. Vitabile, you would like to take that? And also CEO.
Yeah, I happen to lead a very small,
All right.
a small NPO, not-for-profit organization. I think the principles that are in this book are really helpful. In at least beginning to instill certain culture. And the examples that you give of discovery and first friend are good ones because they're easy ones to demonstrate that entrepreneurial culture does happen. But you have examples of companies like Mzyece, and not Mzyece as a concept, which has worked, right? And so it can work in organizations. At least they have demonstrated that the principles can work. However, they take a very long time, right? And it's not a once-off. You need a champion, whether the champion is at the very top. Ideally, the leadership, and one of the chapters goes into details around the role of leadership in making sure that the culture, the innovation culture is inculcated. The simple answer is that it will be more difficult for one to instill, in my view, that kind of culture, but it's not impossible. And it does not necessarily have to start at the top. You can have champions within the organization. And I think the Pamoja example is a good one because it demonstrates how agency of some of the employees was used to convince management to consider the concept or to revive or revitalize. So as I indicated, it's a not linear process and it's not a once-off thing. There has to be a concerted effort to make sure that it works and champions. And of course, the book recommends that there is and you need an innovation team to drive that culture of innovation and make sure that it works. You need a team that drives it. But I believe that the championship of some of the employees is able, they can convince the leadership to drive that innovation. But I think there is for bureaucracy, a level of bureaucracy in this big organization to make sure that things work and there is compliance. But too much of that, obviously, yeah, I think it is possible to have employees. I'm not the author.
All right, yeah, you're qualified to comment tonight.
Yes, if I may, thanks for the question, Shingar. We have a concept in the book called the innovation paradox, which pinpoints, which drives directly to your question. Every large enterprise at some point in the beginning was a small entrepreneurial firm that was risk-taking, that was highly innovative, highly agile, but its goal was to grow. And then when it grows and becomes an established corporation, it becomes a victim of its own success. It loses some of its original dynamism in favor of bureaucracy. So this tension between bureaucracy and agility is something that, so of course, the large firm, the discoveries is that they don't want to go back to the startup that they were 30 or 40 years ago. They would refuse that, but they also don't want to be this kind of rigid bureaucratic firm. So how do you take on this dynamism from a small startup and do it in a very targeted way in a large established corporation. That the innovation paradox is central to the book, and there are lots of tools that help to provide direction around that. If the companies you've mentioned have done it or not, I can't say, but we have some examples. Yeah.
All right, I'll take another question. Who came first? Okay. Go ahead.
About this book being called Organizational Innovation, because I thought it's corporate entrepreneurship. But when I had response was that to him corporate innovation is more about the leadership, not the organization. So I think I'm partially covered there. But my second question is that I think it's the second time we are attending the launch where Hugh has written a book. I remember I won the book. You seem to be very interested, if I can address the question to him directly, he seems to be very interested in creating innovation for employees. And I did enjoy the book that he wrote. But what's the difference between the book that you wrote that time and one that we are launching now? Because I see you're busy driving the innovation with them. And my main concern also is about government. I think corporate are regularly adopting or promoting influence to be, but government may be worried about that. How do we sit together to encourage government? Because that's where you get the frustrations, where the employees are trying to be entrepreneurial because of putting the tape. It's very, very difficult. As I said, that private sector discovery, most of them are getting it, but if you calculate here, it is, and also the last one, how do we retain the culture as well? We think of the situation of Vodacom, SMS, how do you retain the culture of employees remaining innovative? How do they are not, and how will we retain the culture? They maintain their IP one organization. Yeah, so those are my few comments mixed with the questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Perhaps we should start. You want to say something about the organizational innovation?
So that was just a quick when Prof Mills asked me, how does this intrapreneurship journey link to innovation within organizations? We said, well, this is actually about how innovative employees entrepreneurship. So all I said was that we could have renamed it. We played around with a number of names. All I said is we could have renamed it something like the innovative organization. But that's the name we have. So that was not a substantive comment. It was just saying there are many ways to say what we said in the title.
All right. What's the difference between the previous edition of the book?
Yeah, so I do think we covered this earlier. The previous edition was really, again, based on our experiences, our interactions with other innovation leaders in the States. We didn't really think about African audience and African case studies. And obviously, this is why I was saying, I think with this second edition, you can read this book and you can see how it does a better job of resonating with this new audience. As I said earlier, I think the second edition is just a much better book overall. And if I may, I'll just address this question about the passion about employees, my passion for having employees do innovative work. There are too many of us who are in jobs that we don't love, that we see as drudgery. But actually, you'll find that many people, myself included, been in jobs where you look forward to going to work. When you're in the shower, you're already thinking about some problems at work that you're going to solve. And work doesn't feel like work. It just feels like a passion and something you're trying to accomplish. Before you know it, the day goes by and it's time to go home because you are so engaged. And I personally believe that this should be the experience for most people. There's no reason why we should feel like work has to be a drudgery. And a lot of it comes down to, Diran was mentioning the innovation paradox, that because, we necessarily have to take on more processes and bureaucracies as organizations grow and become more complex. So, one of the casualties of that is thinking about how to keep the work meaningful and engaging. And again, I don't feel like it's a fait accompli that we have to give up on this notion that employees can be fulfilled in the work that they're doing, even in large organizations. So yes, I'm very passionate about that. And we have experienced this notion as an expression we use at Intuit of people doing the best work of their lives. That when they're in that mode, they are truly thankful and again truly feeling fulfilled in that moment. And so that's why for me this is it's a mission worth spreading about how we can make not just achieve growth, not just achieve good things in terms of financial results, but also in terms of just having people have more meaningful work lives.
All right, thank you, Hugh. We're drawing towards the conclusion of our discussion, but I'll take the last round of questions before we do this. Prof. Mjumo, there was a question about, how do you cultivate innovation within the state? Mariana Mazzucato wrote a book called The Entrepreneurial State. How she did touch on that in Tabile, but perhaps if you can expand on that.
Yeah, this is a very important question. And, South Africa actually is a leader in this area, although unfortunately it hasn't yet permeated through all of the government departments. But South Africa has an institution called CPSI, the Center for Public Sector Innovation. It's a very, very important. It's under the Department of Public Service Administration. And their entire purpose is to bring a culture, tools and skills and so on that they need. Actually, they have some great examples. I've done some work myself. To talk about in terms of the details, but you can look up what they have done and what they're going to do. I think will be very. So yeah, this is a very, very key area. And I think all African governments, and in fact all governments around take very seriously.
Yeah. All right. Let me take the last round of questions because I want to give the author some time to mingle with you, to sign the books, and to have some photo opportunities. So I'll start with the lady at the back because the hand has been up for a while. And who else is there? And you said. And so the two heads here. The last one. So 4. Okay. Keep it nice and crisp, please.
My question is, I don't know if it's been the structure of the organization has an effect on the
So are you able to speak up? Are you sure? Can you hear? Very. Yeah, if you can have closer, just speak up a bit.
Yeah, so did you find that whether it's hierarchical or whether it's so did you experiment with it or what is the case studies? What kinds of people that impact innovation?
Okay. Did you hear that?
Yes.
So you take that one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take the last 3.
My name is Jonas Sedeti. worked for the Department of Science and Innovation for about 18 years. And I'm sure you would all agree that the Department of Science and Innovation has demonstrated that innovation.
Yes, yeah.
The secret is probably in the consistency of the leadership. That the leadership has been together for a long time. Secondly, that they are also aware of global developments, cutting edge changes such as the square kilometer array, where we are the leaders globally in astronomy. So, third element is to be able to listen to your constituency. The policies that are driven by the Department of Science and Innovation do not come from the heads and minds of bureaucrats only, but through the interaction with the constituency that they serve, they've been able to pick up what could lead into that. I was responsible for taking indigenous knowledge from an IKS policy document to where it is mainstreamed in most of the universities. And today we even have an act that protects indigenous knowledge in this country. So I think that we've been able to demonstrate that government does innovate. And that there are intrapreneurs within government. Success there.
Should we take the next one? That's the last one.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to interact with the authors of such a very, I think, very usable book for those that seek to get answers on how to scale up from, small inception of businesses. I think my question is very specific and short. I just wanted to ask, growing up, my mom used to throw a lot of books my way. So I've read so many books previously that bear no meaning to me today, like Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's when I realized I wanted to be a more impactful, in the works that I do, and not so much profit maximization. But with respect to this book, I wanted to just ask, at what stage does a small business, well, let's not refer to it as small, let's say a startup, at what stage does the startup business find the tools that are in this book that have been thoroughly researched, usable to an extent where they can scale? I ask this because, in a startup environment, like the example that was made of Apple, when you've got 2 employees, or you've got 8 employees or 10, everybody is so tasked that it becomes nearly impossible to have a no work day, let's think outside of the box. So I just wanted to know, at what stage do the authors feel this book would make best sense for startup businesses? Thank you.
Okay, I'll invite you, Hugh, to respond to the last question about the startup. At what stage? I'm not sure if you heard that. And then Mjumo, the question about structure there. And this was a comment. So perhaps if you want to say something, but let's enrich our conversation. It's not a question. So those two, and then we'll conclude.
Yeah, so thank you. I'll tackle the question, the last question that was asked. Thank you for that question. It's actually a really good question. If you had asked me maybe a decade ago, I would have said no. For the reasons that you pointed out, startups are by definition, are in a very entrepreneurial, innovative mode, and so maybe these tools are not as applicable. But I was surprised because at one point, I was asked to advise a startup that was 2 years old. And when speaking to the different employees, one of the things I came to realize is they already had legacy issues. Just after 2 years, they already had built technology that was starting to become obsolete, or that things that they had built that needed improvement. And so but they were so busy, they had no time to essentially take a step back and deal with some of these issues. Sometimes you'll hear this concept called tech debt, where as you're building a product, you'll find that you have acquired a debt you need to address. And so this notion of, in the case of this startup, what I suggested to them was just to start with, in a month, just take half a day to give employees the freedom to work on whatever things they choose. And in particular, the things that they've been bothering them, things that have been getting in the way, that can help make their work more efficient. And so they did this, and they were blown away by the kind of productivity gains they got from just a half-day investment. And so that particular experience told me that, yes, I think every organization can benefit from having that space and time, again, to empower employees to work on these types of endeavors. Again, you'll find a lot of the most obvious gains come from what I'll call internal process improvements, things that are internal facing that make you more efficient. You'll find those are the very natural place for even the smallest organizations to make gains. And so you can say, yes, we're a small startup, but you can figure out what's the right amount of time, the right amount of frequency to do it. It might just be once a quarter, maybe half a day, maybe a day. You can figure out what is the right, what's appropriate for your situation. But yes, it's a long answer, but in short, yes, even the small startups can benefit.
Yeah, this was a very interesting question about to what extent does the structure affect the culture and so on. Examples. I mean, we had the example given earlier of Steve Wozniak trying to introduce his innovation into HP, being unsuccessful, and then going on to found a company as co-founder Steve Jobs. So you do have those examples. Perhaps the company is too rigid, too hierarchical, not open enough to. The key point that we're trying to get across is that the innovation culture is something that can be introduced in large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies. And importantly, it's something that is within the scope of leaders to affect, but also individual employees can exercise agency in various ways. We have some examples in the book where individuals are able to influence the direction of the company, even though the structure may not be that. So what we're saying is the agency of individuals is also important and shouldn't be neglected. Maybe just one final point, one little tidbit from the book, and this term I learned from Hugh. Actually, I don't know how many of you have heard of hippos. Not the animals, but hippos means highest paid person's opinion. Very often in organizations, the hippos dictate what happens in the organization. But one of the clues that the book gives is that you should try to present data so that decisions are made on the basis of data rather than hierarchy. So if you can present an experiment or some data and show to the people that are higher up, say, look, we run this small experiment, here's some results that show that this might be a promising direction for us to take, then that might be one practical tool that could be used to override the structural impediments.
All right. So thank you very much, Mjumo. And that's how we come to the end of our discussion. Do we have it? You want to take the leadership?
Yes.
Okay, sure.
No, thank you for your Department of Science and Innovation, which from a government perspective is sort of out there and department. But you will agree with me that the DSI is not particularly influential within government and needs to be mainstreamed across government. And even more so within the broader economy, including especially business. And you would probably be pleased to know that the business school has the most innovation competence, to the point that the Faculty of Science and the Faculty of Engineering, because innovation is not science and technology, it's the intersection between technology, societal outcomes. And they understand that as brilliant as they are, they need a systematic understanding of that exchange. So we welcome, I'm a huge supporter of all the projects you've named, but we need to come closer to those who can make it meaningful for society. And this is what the book would give DSI officials and other government officials, private sector officials, ways to collaborate and interact in a more meaningful way. I just thought I'd get that as much. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Diran. The intrapreneur's journey, empowering employees to drive growth. I would like to congratulate the authors, again, Hugh Molotsi, joining us from California, Los Angeles. And Mjumo Mzyece, the professor here at WBS School, associate professor of technology and operations management. Diran Soumonni, who is a professor also of innovation, policy and management, as well as our discussants this evening, Dr. Rithabile Melamo, who is the CEO of South African, I've never seen this word before, Industry Association. It's been a very enriching, stimulating conversation. We can spend the whole night talking here, but you need to read the book. So I think for you to read the book. So at this stage, I also want to thank the WBS School, the director, Maurice Khadebe, the publisher, Wits University Press, and also members of the audience who participated and attended this evening. We are now closing. We move from here to the authors will be available outside to sign the book and to mingle with you. And the book is selling for, it costs 350 rands, but tonight there's a 20% discount, so it's selling for 280 rands. Thank you very much for coming here. We'll have more book launches coming up here. We are committed to showcasing our academics here.
Yeah.
So the written books, we've got the next one coming soon. Professor Moyo, we have another one, Professor Jabulile, and then we have Professor Brian Armstrong and Greg. So we sending information about all this. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.